3 years ago, shortly after he was elected to the Senate. It was to the Call to Renewal conference that was sponsored by Jim Wallace and some other progressive, evangelical Christians. Those are the clips that you'll see where he's delivering a speech from the podium. And the other clips that you'll see are from the forum that Saddleback Church down in Orange County held during the election. We're only going to show the Obama clips. There, of course, were McCain clips as well. He'll be interviewed at that time by Rick Warren, who, of course, earlier this week led the invocation. So we'll go ahead and we'll start with that, and I'll introduce our speakers after we show those first couple of clips.
I was not raised in a particularly religious household, as undoubtedly many in the audience were. My father, who returned to Kenya when I was just 2, was born a Muslim, but as an adult was an atheist. My mother, whose parents were non-practicing Baptists and Methodists, was probably one of the most spiritual people I knew, one of the kindest, best people I have ever known. But she grew up with a healthy skepticism of organized religion herself, partly because of the hypocrisy that she had seen in the church early in her life. And because she grew up with a healthy skepticism of organized religion, so did I. So it wasn't until after college, when I went to Chicago to work as a community organizer, that I confronted my own spiritual dilemma. I was working with churches, and the Christians who I was working with, they recognized themselves in me. They saw that I knew their book, that I shared their values, that I sang their songs. But they sensed that a part of me remained detached and removed, that I was an observer in their midst. And in time, I came to realize that something was missing for me as well, that without a vessel for my beliefs, without a commitment to a particular community of faith, at some level, I would always remain apart and alone. And if it weren't for the particular attributes of the historically black church, I might have accepted this fate. But as the months passed in Chicago, I found myself drawn not just to work with the church, but be in the church. And for one thing, I believed and still believe in the power of the African-American religious tradition to spur social change, a power made real by some of the leaders who are here today. Because of its past, the black church understands in an intimate way the biblical call to feed the hungry and to clothe the naked, to challenge powers and principalities. And in its historical struggle for freedom and the rights of man, I was able to see faith as more than just a comfort to the weary or a hedge against death, but rather as an active, palpable agent in the world, as a source of hope.
You've made no doubt about your faith in Jesus Christ. What does that mean to you? What does it mean to you to trust in Christ? And what does that mean on a daily basis? I mean, what does that really look like?
Well, as a starting point, it means I believe in that Jesus Christ died for my sins, and that I am redeemed through him. That is a source of strength and sustenance on a daily basis. I know that I don't walk alone, and I know that if I can get myself out of the way, that I can maybe carry out in some small way what he intends. And it means that those sins that I have on a fairly regular basis, hopefully, will be washed away. But what it also means, I think, is a sense of obligation to embrace not just words, but through deeds, the expectations, I think, that God has for us. And that means thinking about the least of these. It means acting, acting justly and loving mercy and walking humbly with our God. And that, I think, trying to apply those lessons on a daily basis, knowing that you're going to fall a little bit short each day, and being able to kind of take note and saying, well, that didn't quite work out the way I think it should have, but maybe I can get a little bit better. It gives me the confidence to try things, and including things like running for president, that, where you're going to screw up once in a while.
Yeah.
Today we've got two wonderful speakers, well qualified to talk about Barack Obama, both of them people who admire Barack Obama. One voted for him, one voted for John McCain. I'll let you all figure out, if you can, which voted for which. They both deserve long introductions, but given our short amount of time, I'm just going to introduce them very briefly. First, Professor Doug Kmiec. We know him well here at the law school. He wrote a book, Can a Catholic Vote for Him? Referring to Barack Obama. Secondly, Professor John Jones from Seaver College. He teaches communications there. He has written extensively and is well known for writing about Ronald Reagan and Ronald Reagan's speeches, and recently has turned to writing on Barack Obama and his speeches. And I'm going to give them each a few minutes here at the beginning to make some introductory comments, and then we'll look at some more clips and have them comment as we go along. And we're going to have an opportunity for you to ask some questions. We'll have a mic on either side. We are taping this, so it'd be nice if you could speak into the mic. Doug Kmiec.
Thank you. I had the pleasure over the last few days to celebrate the inauguration with the new president, and also in particular to worship with the president on Wednesday at the National Cathedral at the National Prayer Service, where across the aisle from the president was his grandmother, not his maternal grandmother, who is deceased, died just shortly, tragically, before his election, but his paternal Kenyan grandmother, Granny, as he calls her, and after the service, my wife Carol came over and made a gift of a rosary to Granny, which is just a continuation of the Kmiec's efforts to evangelize President Obama for the Catholic faith. I didn't, very briefly, because I know Bob has other plans for the dynamic, I'm just going to give a structure of how I came to Senator Obama's side and why, in part based upon the first presentation that he gave. I started out the election cycle with Mitt Romney. That worked out very well for Mitt Romney. But the attraction for me and Governor Romney was his faith. His faith, not that I am a Mormon, but his faith, his Mormon faith, greatly made him, it seemed to me, a man of great integrity in business, a man of great service, as well as a person who has a powerfully good family. Faith also was recognized by him in a very important message that he gave at the end of his campaign as indispensable to the well-being of this republic, and an admission that many public figures would not often make. Senator Obama and this call to renewal speech attracted my attention for the following propositions. One, he set out throughout his campaign to deliberately stop the use of religion from being a wedge issue. It was commonplace, and indeed, unfortunately, still commonplace, for Democratic voters, Democrats to tell undecided voters that if you elect a Republican, there will be an established national religion. And it was Republicans want to tell undecided voters that Democrats really hate all people of religious belief, and that in one subtle form or another there was this, let's win this election by dividing people on the basis of their faith. Let's not look for common ground. Let's find ways to divide. And Senator Obama, now President Obama, campaigned directly against that, and I think quite successfully. Of course, his own faith was challenged in the context of the primary campaign by the disclosures of the interesting videotapes of Reverend Jeremiah Wright. We can perhaps talk about that in the discussion. I think it would merit some commentary. But the one thing that I think we should all recognize about Reverend Wright's church is something that President Obama said in that clip, and that is one of the most important things is that it allowed him to live his faith. It made enormous, tangible, positive contributions to the uplift of that community. Faith for President Obama gives him a very definite perspective about human nature. As I often tell my students in constitutional law, the founders had a conception of human nature. It was very pessimistic. It was a conception of human nature that was dark. It was a conception of human nature that man would sin, that man would abuse power if, in fact, he was given any chance to utilize it. Senator Obama recognizes what I would call not a pessimistic view of man, but a realistic view of man, that, in fact, he has a nobility to him, that he indeed was made in an image and likeness of a divine creator, and that, in fact, one can organize society in such a way in which one would be of great service to others. Indeed, his entire life as a community organizer, made fun of by Mrs. Palin, but greatly honored and revered by him, says much of what his administration is about, namely working from the bottom up, not displacing individual actors who can do good, but recognizing where they need resources and they need opportunities and they need training to empower them to accomplish that. That is the ethic by which he lives. And of course, we started that on Monday with the National Day of Service, and I'm happy to say that Pepperdine participated in that through its legal aid clinic. And maybe many of you participated in other ways as we were doing so in the nation's capital as well. It very much framed the relationship of faith that Senator Obama has to transforming this culture and this country for the good. I'm already being given the 1-minute signal, so I'll reserve everything else for the commentary. Thank you.
It's an honor to participate in this forum with Professor Kmiec, a man that I have admired long before I came to Pepperdine, and I am thankful for the opportunity to speak to you today and share my perspective on the Obama presidency and particularly the role that religion has in public policy. I first became aware of Barack Obama, like many of you, sitting in my living room watching that fantastic keynote address that he gave in 2004. When they first announced his name, I didn't really know what to expect, but about 16 minutes later, I knew that I had just seen the best political orator of my lifetime since Ronald Wilson Reagan, and I immediately became intrigued by this man and his public discourse. For a long time, there have been many who have believed that rhetoric is a thing of the past, that it no longer has the power that it once did. Last year during the fires, when we had all evacuated to the cafeteria, an astute political observer on this university campus, I will not mention the person's name, came up to me, and at that time, Hillary Clinton was ahead of Barack Obama by about 22 points. And this person came up to me, patted me on the shoulder, knowing that I teach rhetoric, and said, "Just goes to show you that rhetoric doesn't have the power it once did." That person has been very, very quiet recently. And I've tried to look at what makes Barack Obama so persuasive. And one of the things that I have come up with is his ability to identify with other people, whether they agree with his politics or not. Kenneth Burke, the renowned rhetorical scholar, says, if you're going to persuade a person, you can only do so to the extent that you can identify with them, show common ground, show that at the core you're really not that different, but that you have a lot of things in common. And I believe Barack Obama has done that in his public discourse. And one of the areas in which he has done that is through the public sharing of his faith. The testimony that you saw a few moments ago really demonstrates the power of narrative. And you see a person sharing a story really that could be anybody's story, anyone who has undergone a conversion experience, as Gary Selby and I were talking about this morning. Anyone who once was not a Christian now is a Christian. Anyone who has ever converted could relate to this story. Not everyone relates to rational argument. Not everyone relates to scientific method. But everyone can be touched by, influenced by, persuaded by a powerful narrative. And so Barack Obama creates identification through powerful narrative. Now notice that his religion is not so much one of subscribing to particular points of doctrine, or even so much about a moral code, but it's more about looking after the least of these. And there's the quote from Malachi about loving justice and loving mercy and walking humbly with one's God. And so you notice that with Barack Obama, he comes to faith when he is immersed in a faith community and he sees Christianity in action. He sees people living out their faith through social activism, through helping the poor, through feeding the hungry. It impresses him, and it becomes something that becomes very real to him. And so he shares that through his public rhetoric. And the ability to identify not only through narrative, but through common obligation to help our fellow human beings is a powerful vehicle and has helped make him very persuasive.
Professor Kmiec has already provided a great introduction to the next two clips. They're from the Call to Renewal speech, and in these he is talking first to secularists and then secondly to social conservatives.
Imagine Lincoln's second inaugural address without references to the judgments of the Lord. Or King's I Have a Dream speech without references to all God's children. Their summoning of a higher truth helped inspire what had seemed impossible. Moved the nation to embrace a common destiny. So our failure as progressives to tap into the moral underpinnings of the nation is not just rhetorical, though. Our fear of getting preaching may also lead us to discount the role that values and culture play in some of our most urgent social problems. After all, the problem of poverty and racism, the uninsured and the unemployed, all the problems that are chronicled in this pamphlet are not simply technical problems in search of the perfect 10-point plan. They're rooted in both societal indifference and individual callousness. They're rooted in the imperfections of man. And solving these problems will require changes in government policy, but it will also require a change in hearts and a change in minds. I believe in keeping guns off the streets of the inner city, and that our leaders must say so in the face of the gun manufacturers' lobby. But I also believe that when a gangbanger shoots indiscriminately into a crowd because he feels somebody's disrespected him, we've got a moral problem. There's a hole in that young man's heart, and a hole that the government alone cannot fix. Which brings me to my second point. Democracy demands that the religiously motivated translate their concerns into universal rather than religion-specific values. What do I mean by this? It requires that their proposals be subject to argument and amenable to reason. Now, I may be opposed to abortion for religious reasons, to take one example, but if I seek to pass a law banning the practice, I can't simply point to the teachings of my church or evoke God's will. I have to explain why abortion violates some principle that is accessible to people of all faiths, including those with no faith at all. Now, this is going to be difficult for some who believe in the inerrancy of the Bible, as many evangelicals do. But in a pluralistic society, we have no choice. Politics depends on our ability to persuade each other of common aims based on a common reality. It involves compromise, the art of what's possible. And at some fundamental level, religion doesn't allow for compromise. It's the art of the impossible. If God's spoken, then followers are expected to live up to God's edicts, regardless of the consequences. Now, to base one's own life on such uncompromising commitments may be sublime, but to base our policy making on such commitments would be a dangerous thing.
We'll stop it there and give our commentators a chance, if they want, to say something about these statements concerning the place of religion in public life.
Well, these statements were difficult for me because I am a Catholic, and the teaching of the Catholic Church is quite absolute on the matter of abortion. It is an intrinsic evil. It can be justified under no circumstances. And not only that, but it is the teaching of the Church that if I voted for a candidate because of the belief that Senator Obama has, that I'd go to hell. And I've been told that's where I'm going repeatedly since my endorsement of the senator. So I had to write a book about it, but so I'm hoping God likes to read. And I also had the privilege of sitting down with the senator last summer with a group of faith leaders where I put this question to him. I said, I told him my belief and my dilemma, and he basically said something similar to what you just heard there. He said, I believe that in this life there is no moral actor that can make that choice better than a woman. And I respect a woman's judgment on that question. I believe it is a tragic moral choice. I would prefer that she make that tragic moral choice in favor of life, but I am not in a position to obligate her to do that. And I said, well, why not? And he said, well, because among other things, different religious believers believe differently than you, Professor. And I said, well, yes, of course. And he said, pointing out, he said, there are Presbyterians that believe life begins at birth. There are Jewish traditions that begin that life begins at birth and not at natural conception. There are Methodists that have the same belief and don't assign particular significance to that first human cell, that human zygote. So what do you do about them, he said, Professor. And, so we got two con law professors now doing a Socratic dialogue, and a lot of other people, saying, who's that guy? And my trump card always is the trump card that, in fact, the church plays. The Catholic Church takes the position that it does on human life, not because of the Bible, although it believes in the inerrancy of the Bible, but primarily because, as a matter of objective scientific fact, the Church says this human zygote is human, and if you don't interfere with it, it will become a person. And by virtue of that, it is entitled to legal protection, so that they go from the scientific fact of the completeness of the first fertilized cell to a legal conclusion of personhood. And I asked the senator, exactly why isn't that persuasive? Because that's more than religion then, that's science. And you may have this clip at the Saddleback conference. You want to play it? You got it?
I do.
Go ahead and play it.